Highbridge Audio presents Beowulf, translated and read by Seamus Heaney.
After these words, the Prince of the Weather Geats was impatient to be away, and plunged suddenly. Without further ado, he dived into the heaving depths of the lake. It was the best part of a day before he could see the solid bottom. The hero observed that swamp thing from hell, the Tarnhag, in all her terrible strength, then heaved his war sword and swung his arm. The decorated blade came down ringing and singing on her head. But he soon found his battle torch extinguished. The shining blade refused to bite. It spared her and failed the man in his need. It had gone through many hand-to-hand fights, had hewed the armour and helmets of the doomed, but here at last the fabulous powers of that heirloom failed. Higelac's kinsman kept thinking about his name and fame. He never lost heart. Then, in a fury, he flung his sword away. The keen inlaid worm-loop-patterned steel was hurled to the ground. He would have to rely on the might of his arm. So must a man do who intends to gain enduring glory in a combat. Life doesn't cost him a thought. Then the Prince of the War Geats, warming to this fight with Grendel's mother, gripped her shoulder and laid about him in a battle frenzy. He pitched his killer opponent to the floor, but she rose quickly and retaliated, grappled him tightly in her grim embrace. The sure-footed fighter felt suddenly daunted. The strongest of warriors stumbled and fell. So she pounced upon him and pulled out a broad, whetted knife. Now she would avenge her only child. But the mesh of the chain mail on Beowulf's shoulder shielded his life, turned the edge and tip of the blade. The son of Ecgtheow would surely have perished, and the Geats lost their warrior under the wide earth, had the strong links and locks of his war gear not helped to save him. Holy God decided the victory. It was easy for the Lord, the ruler of heaven, to redress the balance once Beowulf got back on his feet. Then he saw a blade that boded well, a sword in her armoury, an ancient heirloom from the days of the giants, an ideal weapon, one that any warrior would envy, but so huge and heavy of itself only Beowulf could wield it in a battle. So the Shielding's hero, hard-pressed and enraged, took a firm hold of the hilt and swung the blade in an arc, a resolute blow that bit deep into her neck bone and severed it entirely, toppling the doomed house of her flesh. She fell to the floor. The sword dripped blood. The swordsman was elated. The seafarer's leader made for land, resolutely swimming, delighted with his prize, the mighty load he was lugging to the surface. His thanes advanced in a troop to meet him, thanking God and taking great delight in seeing their prince back safe and sound. Quickly the hero's helmet and mail shirt were loosed and unlaced. The lake settled. Clouds darkened above the bloodshot depths. With high hearts they headed away along footpaths and trails through the fields, roads that they knew, each of them wrestling with the head they were carrying from the lakeside cliff, men kingly in their courage and capable of difficult work. It was a task for 4 to hoist Grendel's head on a spear and bear it under a strain to the bright hall. Beowulf, son of Ecgtheow, spoke. So, son of Halfdane, prince of the Shieldings, we are glad to bring this booty from the lake. It is a token of triumph, and we tender it to you. I barely survived the battle under water. It was hard fought, a desperate affair that could have gone badly. If God had not helped me, the outcome would have been quick and fatal. I have wrested the hilt from the enemy's hand, avenged the evil done to the Danes. It is what was due. And this I pledge, O Prince of the Shieldings. You can sleep secure with your company of troops in Heorot Hall. Never need you fear for a single thane of your sept or nation, young warriors or old, that laying waste of life you and your people endured of yore. Then the golden hilt was handed over to the old lord, a relic from long ago for the venerable ruler. That rare smithwork was passed on to the prince of the Danes when those devils perished. Once death removed that murdering, guilt-steeped, God-cursed fiend, eliminating his unholy life and his mother's as well, it was willed to that king, who of all the lavish gift lords of the north was the best regarded between the two seas. And soon all was restored, the same as before. Happiness came back, the hall was thronged, and a banquet set forth. Black night fell and covered them in darkness. Then the company rose for the old campaigner. The grey-haired prince was ready for bed, and a need for rest came over the brave shield-bearing Geat. He was a weary seafarer far from home, so immediately a house-guard guided him out, one whose office entailed looking after whatever a thane on the road in those days might need or require. It was noble courtesy. That great heart rested. The hall towered, gold-shingled and gabled, and the guests slept in it, until the black raven with raucous glee announced heaven's joy, and a hurry of brightness overran the shadows. Warriors rose quickly, impatient to be off. Their own country was beckoning the nobles, and the bold voyager longed to be aboard his distant boat. Then that stalwart fighter ordered Hrunting to be brought to Unferth, and bade Unferth take the sword and thanked him for lending it. He said he had found it a friend in battle and a powerful help. He put no blame on the blade's cutting edge. He was a considerate man. And there the warriors stood in their war gear, eager to go, while their honoured lord approached the platform where the other sat. The undaunted hero addressed Hrothgar. Beowulf, son of Ecgtheow, spoke. Now we who crossed the wide sea have to inform you that we feel a desire to return to Higelac. Here we have been welcomed and thoroughly entertained. You have treated us well. If there is any favour on earth I can perform beyond the deeds of arms I have done already, anything that would merit your affections more, I shall act, my lord, with alacrity. If ever I hear from across the ocean that people on your borders are threatening battle, as attackers have done from time to time, I shall land with 1,000 thanes at my back to help your cause. Higelac may be young to rule a nation, but this much I know about the king of the Geats. He will come to my aid and want to support me by word and action in your hour of need, when honour dictates that I raise a hedge of spears around you. Then, if Hrethric should think about travelling as a king's son to the court of the Geats, he will find many friends. Foreign places yield more to one who is himself worth meeting. Hrothgar spoke and answered him. The Lord in his wisdom sent you those words, and they came from the heart. I have never heard so young a man make truer observations. You are strong in body and mature in mind, impressive in speech. If it should come to pass that Hrethel's descendant dies beneath a spear, if deadly battle or the sword blade or disease fells the prince who guards your people, and you are still alive, then I firmly believe the seafaring Geats won't find a man worthier of acclaim as their king and defender than you, if only you would undertake the lordship of your homeland. My liking for you deepens with time, dear Beowulf. What you have done is to draw two peoples, the Geat nation and us neighbouring Danes, into shared peace and a pact of friendship in spite of hatreds we have harboured in the past. For as long as I rule this far-flung land, treasures will change hands, and each side will treat the other with gifts. Across the gannet's bath, over the broad sea, whirled prows will bring presents and tokens. I know your people are beyond reproach in every respect, steadfast in the old way with friend or foe. Then the Earl's defender furnished the hero with 12 treasures and told him to set out, to sail with those gifts safely home to the people he loved, but to return promptly. And so the good and grey-haired Dane, that high-born king, kissed Beowulf and embraced his neck, then broke down in sudden tears. Two forebodings disturbed him in his wisdom, but one was stronger. Never more would they meet each other face to face, and such was his affection that he could not help being overcome. His fondness for the man was so deep-founded, it warmed his heart and wound the heartstrings tight in his breast. The embrace ended, and Beowulf, glorious in his gold regalia, stepped the green earth. Straining at anchor and ready for boarding, his boat awaited him. So they went on their journey, and Hrothgar's generosity was praised repeatedly. He was a peerless king, until old age sapped his strength and did him mortal harm, as it has done so many. Down to the waves then, dressed in the web of their chainmail and war-shirts, those young men marched in high spirits. The coast guard spied them, Thane setting forth, the same as before. His salute this time from the top of the cliff was far from unmannerly. He galloped to meet them, and as they took ship in their shining gear, he said how welcome they would be in Geatland. Then the broad hull was beached on the sand, to be cargoed with treasure, horses, and war gear. The curved prow motioned. The mast stood high above Hrothgar's riches in the loaded hold. The guard who had watched the boat was given a sword with gold fittings, and in future days that present would make him a respected man at his place on the mead bench. Then the keel plunged and shook in the sea, and they sailed from Denmark. Right away the mast was rigged with its sea shawl, sail ropes were tightened, timbers drummed, and stiff winds kept the wave-crosser skimming ahead. As she heaved forward, her foamy neck was fleet and buoyant, a lapped prow loping over currents, until finally the Geats caught sight of coastline and familiar cliffs. The keel reared up, wind lifted it home, it hit on the land. The harbour guard came hurrying out to the rolling water. He had watched the offing long and hard, on the lookout for those friends. With the anchor cables, he moored their craft right where it had beached, in case a backwash might catch the hull and carry it away. Then he ordered the prince's treasure trove to be carried ashore. It was a short step from there to where Rethel's son and heir, Hygelac the gold giver, makes his home on a secure cliff in the company of retainers. Heroic Beowulf and his band of men crossed the wide strand, striding along the sandy foreshore. The sun shone. The world's candle warmed them from the south as they hastened to where, as they had heard, the young king, Ongentheow's killer and his people's protector, was dispensing rings inside his bawn. Beowulf's return was reported to Hygelac as soon as possible. News that the captain was now in the enclosure, his battle brother back from the fray, alive and well, walking to the hall. Room was quickly made on the king's orders, and the troops filed across the cleared floor. After Hygelac had offered greetings to his loyal Thane in lofty speech, he and his kinsman, that hale survivor, sat face to face. Heorith's daughter moved about with the mead jug in her hand, taking care of the company, filling the cups that warriors held out. Then Healach began to put courteous questions to his old comrade in the high hall. He hankered to know every tale the sea geats had to tell. "How did you fare on your foreign voyage, dear Beowulf, when you abruptly decided to sail away across the salt water and fight at Heorot? Did you help Hrothgar much in the end? Could you ease the prince of his well-known troubles? Your undertaking cast my spirits down. I dreaded the outcome of your expedition and pleaded with you long and hard to leave the killer be. Let the South Danes settle their own blood feud with Grendel. So God be thanked, I am granted this sight of you, safe and sound." Beowulf, son of Ecgtheow, spoke. "What happened, Lord Healach, is hardly a secret any more among men in this world. Myself and Grendel coming to grips on the very spot where he had visited destruction on the victory shieldings and violated life and limb. Losses I avenged, so no earthly offspring of Grendel's need ever boast of that bout before dawn, no matter how long the last of his evil family survives. When I first landed, I proceeded to the ring hall and saluted Hrothgar. Once he discovered why I had come, the son of Halfdane sent me immediately to sit with his own sons on the bench. It was a happy gathering. In my whole life I have never seen mead enjoyed more in any hall on earth. Sometimes the Queen herself appeared, peace pledge between nations, to hearten the young ones and hand out a torque to a warrior, then take her place. Sometimes Hrothgar's daughter distributed ale to older ranks in order on the benches. I heard the company call her Freawaru as she made her rounds, presenting men with the gem-studded bowl, young bride-to-be to the gracious Ingeld in her gold-trimmed attire. The friend of the Shieldings favours her betrothal. The guardian of the kingdom sees good in it and hopes this woman will heal old wounds and grievous feuds. But generally the spear is prompt to retaliate when a prince is killed, no matter how admirable the bride may be. Think how the Heathobards will be bound to feel, their lord Ingeld and his loyal thanes, when he walks in with that woman to the feast. Danes are at the table, being entertained, honoured guests in glittering regalia, burnished ring mail that was their host's birthright, looted when the Heathobards could no longer wield their weapons in the shield clash, when they went down with their beloved comrades and forfeited their lives. Then an old spearman will speak while they are drinking, having glimpsed some heirloom that brings alive memories of the massacre. His mood will darken, and heart-stricken in the stress of emotion, he will begin to test a young man's temper and stir up trouble, starting like this. "Now, my friend, don't you recognize your father's sword, his favourite weapon, the one he wore when he went out in his war mask to face the Danes on that final day? After Weathergeld died and his men were doomed, the Shieldings quickly claimed the field. And now here's a son of one or other of those same killers coming through our hall, overbearing us, mouthing boasts, and rigged in armour that by right is yours." And so he keeps on, recalling and accusing, working things up with bitter words, until one of the lady's retainers lies spattered in blood, split open on his father's account. The killer knows the lie of the land and escapes with his life. Then, on both sides, the oath-bound lords will break the peace. A passionate hate will build up in Ingeld, and love for his bride will falter in him as the feud rankles. I therefore suspect the good faith of the Heathobards, the truth of their friendship, and the trustworthiness of their alliance with the Danes. But now, my lord, I shall carry on with my account of Grendel, the whole story of everything that happened in the hand-to-hand fight. After heaven's gem had gone mildly to earth, that maddened spirit, the terror of those twilights, came to attack us where we stood guard, still safe inside the hall. Their deadly violence came down on Hanshio, and he fell as fate ordained, the first to perish, rigged out for the combat. A comrade from our ranks had come to grief in Grendel's maw. He ate up the entire body. There was blood on his teeth. He was bloated and dangerous, all roused up, yet still unready to leave the hall empty-handed. Renowned for his might, he matched himself against me, wildly reaching. He had this roomy pouch, a strange accoutrement, intricately strung and hung at the ready, a rare patchwork of devilishly fitted dragon skins. I had done him no wrong, yet the raging demon wanted to cram me and many another into this bag. But it was not to be, once I got to my feet in a blind fury. It would take too long to tell how I repaid the terror of the land for every life he took, and so won credit for you, my king, and for all your people. And although he got away to enjoy life's sweetness for a while longer, his right hand stayed behind him in Heorot, evidence of his miserable overthrow as he dived into murk on the mere bottom. I got lavish rewards from the Lord of the Danes for my part in the battle, beaten gold and much else, once morning came and we took our places at the banquet table. There was singing and excitement. An old reciter, a carrier of stories, recalled the early days. At times some hero made the timbered harp tremble with sweetness, or related true and tragic happenings. At times the king gave the proper turn to some fantastic tale, or a battle-scarred veteran, bowed with age, would begin to remember the martial deeds of his youth and prime, and be overcome as the past welled up in his wintry heart. We were happy there the whole day long, and enjoyed our time until another night descended upon us. Then, with sudden dispatch, the vehement mother avenged her son and wreaked destruction. Death had robbed her. Geats had slain Grendel. So his ghastly dam struck back and with barefaced defiance laid a man low. Thus life departed from the sage Ashuri, an elder wise in counsel. But afterwards, on the morning following, the Danes could not burn the dead body, nor lay the remains of the man they loved on his funeral pyre. She had fled with the corpse and taken refuge beneath torrents on the mountain. It was a hard blow for Hrothgar to bear, harder than any he had undergone before. And so the heart-sore king beseeched me in your royal name to take my chances under water, to win glory and prove my worth. He promised me rewards. Hence, as is well known, I went to my encounter with the terror-monger at the bottom of the tarn. For a while it was hand to hand between us. Then blood went curling along the currents, and I beheaded Grendel's mother in the hall with a mighty sword. I barely managed to escape with my life. My time had not yet come. But Halfdane's heir, the shelter of those earls, again endowed me with a multitude of gifts. Thus the king acted with due custom. I was paid and recompensed completely, given full measure and the freedom to choose from Hrothgar's treasures by Hrothgar himself. These, King Healach, I am happy to present to you as gifts. It is still upon your grace that all favour depends. I have few kinsmen who are close, my king, except for your kind self. Then he ordered the boar-framed standard to be brought, the battle-topping helmet, the mail shirt, grey as hoarfrost, and the precious war-sword. I heard 4 horses were handed over next. Beowulf bestowed 4 bay steeds to go with the armour, swift gallopers, all alike. So ought a kinsman act, instead of plotting and planning in secret to bring people to grief, or conspiring to arrange the death of comrades. The warrior king was uncle to Beowulf and honoured by his nephew. Each was concerned for the other's good. I heard he presented Hygd with a gorget, the priceless torque that the prince's daughter Wealhtheow had given him, and 3 horses, supple creatures, brilliantly saddled. The bright necklace would be luminous on Hygd's breast. Thus Beowulf bore himself with valour. He was formidable in battle, yet behaved with honour and took no advantage, never cut down a comrade who was drunk, kept his temper, and warrior that he was, watched and controlled his God-sent strength and his outstanding natural powers. He had been poorly regarded for a long time, was taken by the Geats for less than he was worth, and their lord, too, had never much esteemed him in the mead hall. They firmly believed that he lacked force, that the prince was a weakling. But presently, every affront to his deserving was reversed. The battle-famed king, bulwark of his earls, ordered a gold-chased heirloom of Hrethel's to be brought in. It was the best example of a gem-studded sword in the Geat treasury. This he laid on Beowulf's lap, and rewarded him with land as well, 7,000 hides, and a hall and a throne. Both owned land by birth in that country, ancestral grounds, but the greater right and sway were inherited by the higher born. A lot was to happen in later days in the fury of battle. Hygelac fell, and the shelter of Heardred's shield proved useless against the fierce aggression of the Shieldfings. Ruthless swordsmen, seasoned campaigners, they came against him and his conquering nation, and with cruel force cut him down, so that afterwards the wide kingdom reverted to Beowulf. He ruled it well for 50 winters, grew old and wise as warden of the land, until one began to dominate the dark, a dragon on the prowl from the steep vaults of a stone-roofed barrow where he guarded a hoard. There was a hidden passage unknown to men, but someone managed to enter by it and interfere with the heathen trove. He handled and removed a gem-studded goblet. It gained him nothing, though with a thief's wiles he had outwitted the sleeping dragon. That drove him into rage, as the people of that country would soon discover. The intruder who broached the dragon's treasure and moved him to wrath had never meant to. It was desperation on the part of a slave fleeing the heavy hand of some master, guilt-ridden and on the run, going to ground. But he soon began to shake with terror. In shock, the wretch panicked and ran away with the precious metalwork. There were many other heirlooms heaped inside the earth house, because long ago, with deliberate care, some forgotten person had deposited the whole rich inheritance of a high-born race in that ancient cache. Death had come and taken them all in times gone by, and the one surviving witness of their fate, the last veteran, could envisage only the same fate for himself. He foresaw that his joy in the treasure would be brief. A newly constructed barrow stood waiting on a wide headland close to the waves, its entryway secured. Into it the keeper of the hoard had carried all the goods and golden ware worth preserving. His words were few. Now, earth, hold what earls once held, and heroes can no more. It was mined from you first by honourable men. My own people have been ruined in war. One by one they went down to death, looked their last on sweet life in the hall. I am left with nobody to bear a sword or burnish plated goblets, put a sheen on the cup. The companies have departed. The hard helmet, hasped with gold, will be stripped of its hoops, and the helmet shiner, who should polish the metal of the war mask, sleeps. The coat of mail that came through all fights, through shield collapse and cut of sword, decays with the warrior. Nor may webbed mail range far and wide on the warlord's back beside his mustered troops. No trembling harp, no tuned timbre, no tumbling hawk swerving through the hall, no swift horse pawing the courtyard. Pillage and slaughter have emptied the earth of entire peoples. And so he mourned as he moved about the world, deserted and alone, lamenting his unhappiness day and night, until death's flood brimmed up in his heart. Then an old harrower of the dark happened to find the hoard open, the burning one who hunts out barrows, the slick-skinned dragon threatening the night sky with streamers of fire. People on the farms are in dread of him. He is driven to hunt out hoards underground, to guard heathen gold through age-long vigils, though to little avail. For 3 centuries this scourge of the people had stood guard on that stoutly protected underground treasury, until the intruder unleashed its fury. He hurried to his lord with the gold-plated cup and made his plea to be reinstated. Then the vault was rifled, the ring hoard robbed, and the wretched man had his request granted. His master gazed on that find from the past for the first time. When the dragon awoke, trouble flared again. He rippled down the rock, writhing with anger, when he saw the footprints of the prowler who had stolen too close to his dreaming head. So may a man not marked by fate easily escape exile and woe by the grace of God. The hoard guardian scorched the ground as he scoured and hunted for the trespasser who had troubled his sleep. Hot and savage, he kept circling and circling the outside of the mound. No man appeared in that desert waste, but he worked himself up by imagining battle. Then back in he'd go in search of the cup, only to discover signs that someone had stumbled upon the golden treasures. So the guardian of the mound, the hoard watcher, waited for the gloaming with fierce impatience. His pent-up fury at the loss of the vessel made him long to hit back and lash out in flames. Then, to his delight, the day waned, and he could wait no longer behind the wall, but hurtled forth in a fiery blaze. The first to suffer were the people on the land, but before long it was their treasure-giver who would come to grief. The dragon began to belch out flames and burn bright homesteads. There was a hot glow that scared everyone, for the vile sky-winger would leave nothing alive in his wake. Everywhere the havoc he wrought was in evidence. Far and near, the Geat nation bore the brunt of his brutal assaults and virulent hate. Then back to the hoard he would dart before daybreak to hide in his den. He had swinged the land, swathed it in flame, in fire and burning, and now he felt secure in the vaults of his barrow. But his trust was unavailing. Then Beowulf was given bad news, a hard truth. His own home, the best of buildings, had been burnt to a cinder, the throne room of the Geats. It threw the hero into deep anguish and darkened his mood. The wise man thought he must have thwarted ancient ordinance of the eternal Lord, broken his commandment. His mind was in turmoil. Unaccustomed anxiety and gloom confused his brain. The fire dragon had razed the coastal region and reduced forts and earthworks to dust and ashes. So the war king planned and plotted his revenge. The warrior's protector, prince of the hall troop, ordered a marvellous all-iron shield from his smithy works. He well knew that linden boards would let him down and timber burn. After many trials, he was destined to face the end of his days in this mortal world, as was the dragon, for all his long leasehold on the treasure. The veteran king sat down on the cliff top. He wished good luck to the Geats who had shared his hearth and his gold. He was sad at heart, unsettled yet ready, sensing his death. His fate hovered near, unknowable but certain. It would soon claim his coffered soul, part life from limb. Before long, the prince's spirit would spin free from his body. Beowulf spoke, made a formal boast for the last time. I risked my life often when I was young. Now I am old, but as king of the people, I shall pursue this fight for the glory of winning, if the evil one will abandon his fort and face me in the open. Then he addressed each dear companion one final time, those fighters in their helmets, resolute and high-born. I would rather not use a weapon if I knew another way to grapple with the dragon and make good my boast, as I did against Grendel in days gone by. But I shall be meeting molten venom in the fire he breathes, so I go forth in mail shirt and shield. I won't shift a foot when I meet the cave guard. What occurs on the wall between the two of us will turn out as fate, overseer of men, decides. I am resolved. I scorn further words against this sky-born foe. Men-at-arms, remain here on the barrow, safe in your armour, to see which one of us is better in the end at bearing wounds in a deadly fray. This fight is not yours, nor is it up to any man except me to measure his strength against the monster or to prove his worth. I shall win the gold by my courage, or else mortal combat, doom of battle, will bear your lord away. Then he drew himself up beside his shield. The fabled warrior in his war shirt and helmet trusted in his own strength entirely and went under the crag. No coward path. Hard by the rock face, that hale veteran, a good man who had gone repeatedly into combat in danger and come through, saw a stone arch and a gushing stream that burst from the barrow, blazing and wafting a deadly heat. It would be hard to survive unscathed near the horde, to hold firm against the dragon in those flaming depths. Then he gave a shout. The Lord of the Geats unburdened his breast and broke out in a storm of anger. Under the grey stone his voice challenged and resounded clearly. Hate was ignited. The horde guard recognized a human voice. The time was over for peace and parleying. Pouring forth in a hot battle fume, the breath of the monster burst from the rock. There was a rumble underground. Down there in the barrow, Beowulf the warrior lifted his shield. The outlandish thing writhed and convulsed and vehemently turned on the king, whose keen-edged sword, an heirloom inherited by ancient right, was already in his hand. Roused to a fury, each antagonist struck terror in the other. Unyielding, the lord of his people loomed by his tall shield, sure of his ground, while the serpent looped and unleashed itself. Swaddled in flames, it came gliding and flexing and racing towards its fate. Yet his shield defended the renowned leader's life and limb for a shorter time than he meant it to. That final day was the first time when Beowulf fought and fate denied him glory in battle. So the king of the Geats raised his hand and struck hard at the enamelled scales, but scarcely cut through. The blade flashed and slashed, yet the blow was far less powerful than the hard-pressed king had need of at that moment. The mound keeper went into a spasm and spouted deadly flames. When he felt the stroke, battle fire billowed and spewed. Beowulf was foiled of a glorious victory. The glittering sword, infallible before that day, failed when he unsheathed it, as it never should have. For the son of Ecgtheow, it was no easy thing to have to give ground like that and go unwillingly to inhabit another home in a place beyond. So every man must yield the leasehold of his days. Sad at heart, addressing his companions, Wiglaf spoke wise and fluent words. I remember that time when mead was flowing, how we pledged loyalty to our lord in the hall, promised our ring-giver we would be worth our price, make good the gift of the war gear, these swords and helmets, as and when his need required it. Now the day has come when this Lord we serve needs sound men to give him their support. Let us go to him, help our leader through the hot flame and dread of the fire. As God is my witness, I would rather my body were robed in the same burning blaze as my gold-giver's body than go back home bearing arms. That is unthinkable, unless we have first slain the foe and defended the life of the Prince of the Weathergeats. I well know the things he has done for us deserve better. Why should he alone be left exposed to fall in battle? We must bond together, shield and helmet, mail shirt and sword. Then he waded the dangerous reek and went under arms to his lord, saying only, "Go on, dear Beowulf, do everything you said you would when you were still young, and vowed you would never let your name and fame be dimmed while you lived. Your deeds are famous, so stay resolute, my lord. Defend your life now with the whole of your strength. I shall stand by you." After those words, a wildness rose in the dragon again, and drove it to attack, heaving up fire, hunting for enemies, the humans it loathed. Flames lapped the shield, charred it to the boss, and the body armour on the young warrior was useless to him. But Wiglaf did well under the wide rim Beowulf shared with him, once his own had shattered in sparks and ashes. Inspired again by the thought of glory, the war king threw his whole strength behind a sword stroke and connected with the skull. And Nagling snapped. Beowulf's ancient iron-grey sword let him down in the fight. It was never his fortune to be helped in combat by the cutting edge of weapons made of iron. When he wielded a sword, no matter how blooded and hard-edged the blade, his hand was too strong. The stroke he dealt, I have heard, would ruin it. He could reap no advantage. Then the bane of that people, the fire-breathing dragon, was mad to attack for a third time. When a chance came, he caught the hero in a rush of flame and clamped sharp fangs into his neck. Beowulf's body ran wet with his lifeblood. It came welling out. Next thing, they say, the noble son of Weohstan saw the king in danger at his side and displayed his inborn bravery and strength. He left the head alone, but his fighting hand was burned when he came to his kinsman's aid. He lunged at the enemy lower down, so that his decorated sword sank into its belly, and the flames grew weaker. Once again the king gathered his strength, and drew a stabbing knife he carried on his belt, sharpened for battle. He stuck it deep into the dragon's flank. Beowulf dealt it a deadly wound. They had killed the enemy. Their courage quelled his life. That pair of kinsmen, partners in nobility, had destroyed the foe. So every man should act, be at hand when needed. But now, for the king, this would be the last of his many labours and triumphs in the world. Then the wound dealt by the ground burner earlier began to scald and swell. Beowulf discovered deadly poison suppurating inside him, surges of nausea, and so, in his wisdom, the prince realized his state and proceeded towards a seat on the rampart. He steadied his gaze on those gigantic stones, saw how the earthwork was braced with arches built over columns. And now that Thane, unequalled for goodness, with his own hands washed his lord's wounds, swabbed the weary prince with water, bathed him clean, unbuckled his helmet. Beowulf spoke. In spite of his wounds, mortal wounds, he still spoke, for he well knew his days in the world had been lived out to the end. His allotted time was drawing to a close. Death was very near. Now is the time when I would have wanted to bestow this armour on my own son, had it been my fortune to have fathered an heir and live on in his flesh. For 50 years I ruled this nation. No king of any neighbouring clan would dare face me with troops. None had the power to intimidate me. I stood my ground and took what came, cared for things in my keeping, never fomented quarrels, never swore to a lie. All this consoles me. Go now quickly, dearest Wiglaf, under the grey stone where the dragon is laid out, lost to his treasure. Hurry to feast your eyes on the hoard. Away you go. I want to examine the ancient gold, gaze my fill on those garnered jewels. My going will be easier for having seen the treasure, a less troubled letting go of the life and lordship I have long maintained. And so I have heard the son of Weohstan quickly obeyed the command of his languishing, war-weary lord. He went in his chain mail under the rock-piled roof of the barrow, exulting in his triumph, and saw beyond the seat a treasure trove of astonishing richness, wall hangings that were a wonder to behold, glittering gold spread across the ground, the old dawn-scorching serpent's den packed with goblets and vessels from the past, tarnished and corroding, rusty helmets all eaten away, armbands everywhere, artfully wrought. How easily treasure buried in the ground, gold hidden however skilfully, can escape from any man. And he saw too a standard, entirely of gold, hanging high over the hoard, a masterpiece of filigree. It glowed with light, so he could make out the ground at his feet and inspect the valuables. Of the dragon there was no remaining sign. The sword had dispatched him. The one who had for long minded the hoard, hovering over gold, unleashing fire, surging forth midnight after midnight, had been mown down. Wiglaf went quickly, keen to get back, excited by the treasure. Anxiety weighed on his brave heart. He was hoping he would find the leader of the Geats alive, for he had left him, helpless, earlier, on the open ground. So he came to the place, carrying the treasure, and found his lord bleeding profusely, his life at an end. Again he began to swab his body. The beginnings of an utterance heaved up from the coffers of the king's heart. The old lord gazed sadly at the gold. To the everlasting Lord of all, to the King of glory, I give thanks that I behold this treasure here in front of me. that I have been allowed to leave my people so well endowed on the day I die. Now that I have bartered my last breath to own this fortune, it is up to you to look after their needs. I can hold out no longer. Order my troop to construct a barrow on a headland on the coast, after my pyre has cooled. It will loom on the horizon at Hrone's Ness, and be a reminder among my people, so that in coming times crews under sail will call it Beowulf's Barrow as they steer ships across the wide and shrouded waters. Then the king, in his great-heartedness, unclasped the collar of gold from his neck and gave it to his young thane, telling him to use it and the war shirt and the gilded helmet. You are the last of us, the only one left of the Wegmundings. Fate swept us away, sent my whole brave, high-born clan to their final doom. Now I must follow. That was the warrior's last word. He had no more to confide. The furious heat of the pyre would assail him. His soul fled from his breast to its destined place among the steadfast ones. It was hard then on the young hero, having to watch the one he held so dear there on the ground, going through his death agony. The dragon from under earth, his nightmarish destroyer, lay destroyed as well, utterly without life. He lay there rigid, brought low beside the treasure lodge. Never again would he glitter and glide and show himself off in the midnight air, exulting in his riches. He fell to earth through the battle strength in Beowulf's arm. The treasure had been won, bought and paid for by Beowulf's death. Both had reached the end of the road through the life they had been lent. Before long the battle-dodgers abandoned the wood, the ones who had let their lord down earlier, the tail-turners, 10 of them together. When he needed them most, they had made off. Now they were ashamed, and came behind shields in their battle outfits to where the old man lay. They watched Wiglaf sitting worn out, a comrade shoulder to shoulder with his lord, trying in vain to bring him round with water. Much as he wanted to, there was no way he could preserve his lord's life on earth, or alter in the least the Almighty's will. What God judged right would rule what happened to every man, as it does to this day. Then a stern rebuke was bound to come from the young warrior to the ones who had been cowards. Wiglaf, son of Weohstan, spoke. He upbraided the battle-dodgers, saying, Beowulf had little cause to brag about his armed guard. Yet God, who ordains who wins or loses, allowed him to strike with his own blade when bravery was needed. I could do little to protect his life in the heat of the fray, yet I found new strength welling up when I went to help him. Then my sword connected, and the deadly assaults of our foe grew weaker, the fire coursed less strongly from his head. But when the worst happened, too few rallied around the prince. So it is goodbye now to all you know and love on your home ground, the open-handedness, the giving of war swords. Every one of you with freeholds of land, our whole nation will be dispossessed once princes from beyond get tidings of how you turned and fled and disgraced yourselves. A warrior will die sooner than live a life of shame. Then he ordered the outcome of the fight to be reported to those camped on the ridge, that crowd of retainers who had sat all morning, sad at heart, shield-bearers, wondering about the man they loved. Would this day be his last, or would he return? He told the truth, and did not balk, the rider who bore news to the cliff top. He addressed them all. Now the people's pride and love, the Lord of the Geats, is laid on his deathbed, brought down by the dragon's attack. Beside him lies the bane of his life, dead from knife wounds. There was no way Beowulf could manage to get the better of the monster with his sword. Wiglaf sits at Beowulf's side, the son of Weohstan, the living warrior watching by the dead, keeping weary vigil, holding awake for the loved and the loathed. Now war is looming over our nation. Soon it will be known to Franks and Frisians far and wide that the king is gone. Hostility has been great among the Franks since Hygelac sailed forth at the head of a war fleet into Friesland. There the Het Warda harried and attacked and overwhelmed him with great odds. The leader in his war gear was brought low, fell amongst followers. That lord did not favour his company with spoils. The Merovingian king has been an enemy to us ever since. Nor do I expect peace or pact-keeping of any sort from the Swedes. Remember, at Ravenswood, Ungantheow slaughtered Heathkin, Hrethel's son, when the Geat people in their arrogance attacked first the fierce Scilfings. The return blow was quickly struck by Ochtherry's father. Old and terrible, he felled the Sea King. Then he kept hard on the heels of the foe and drove them, leaderless, lucky to get away, in a desperate rout into Ravenswood. So this bad blood between us and the Swedes, this vicious feud, I am convinced, is bound to revive. They will cross our borders and attack in force when they find out that Beowulf is dead. In days gone by, when our warriors fell and we were undefended, he kept our coffers and our kingdom safe. He worked for the people, but as well as that, he behaved like a hero. We must hurry now to take a last look at the king and launch him, lord and lavisher of rings, on the funeral road. His royal pyre will melt no small amount of gold. Heaped there in a hoard, it was bought at heavy cost, and that pile of rings he paid for at the end with his own life will go up with the flame, be furled in fire. Treasure no follower will wear in his memory, nor lovely woman link and attach as a torque around her neck. But often, repeatedly, in the path of exile they shall walk bereft, bowed under woe, now that their leader's laugh is silenced, his spirits quenched. Many a spear, dawn cold to the touch, will be taken down and waved on high. The swept harp won't waken warriors, but the raven, winging darkly over the doomed, will have news, tidings for the eagle of how he hooked and ate, how the wolf and he made short work of the dead. Such was the drift of the dire report that gallant man delivered. He got little wrong in what he told and predicted. The whole troop rose in tears, then took their way to the uncanny scene under Ernaness. There, on the sand, where his soul had left him, they found him at rest, their ring-giver from days gone by. The great man had breathed his last. Beowulf the king had indeed met with a marvellous death. But what they saw first was far stranger. The serpent on the ground, gruesome and vile, lying facing him. The fire dragon was scarcely burnt, scorched all colours. From head to tail, his entire length was 50 feet. He had shimmered forth on the night air once, then winged back down to his den. But death owned him now. He would never enter his earth gallery again. Beside him stood pitchers and piled-up dishes, silent flagons, precious swords eaten through with rust, ranged as they had been while they waited their 1,000 winters underground. That huge cache, gold inherited from an ancient race, was under a spell, which meant no one was ever permitted to enter the ring hall unless God himself, mankind's keeper, true king of triumphs, allowed some person pleasing to him and in his eyes worthy to open the hoard. Wiglaf, son of Weohstan, spoke. Often when one man follows his own will, many are hurt. This happened to us. Nothing we advised could ever convince the Lord we loved, our land's guardian, not to aggravate the keeper of the gold. Let him lie where he was long accustomed, lurk there under earth until the end of the world. He held to his high destiny. The hoard is laid bare, but at a grave cost. It was too cruel a fate that forced the king to that encounter. I have been inside and seen everything amassed in the vault. I managed to enter, although no great welcome awaited me under the earth wall. I quickly gathered up a huge pile of the priceless treasures hand-picked from the hoard and carried them here where the king could see them. He was still himself, alive, aware, and in spite of his weakness he had many requests. He wanted me to greet you and ordered the building of a barrow that would crown the site of his pyre, serve as his memorial, in a commanding position, since of all men to have lived and thrived and lorded it on earth, his worth and due as a warrior were the greatest. Now let us again go quickly and feast our eyes on that amazing fortune heaped under the wall. I will show the way and bring you close to those coffers packed with rings and bars of gold. Let a bier be made and got ready quickly when we come out, and then let us bring the body of our Lord, the man we loved, to where he will lodge for a long time in the care of the Almighty. Then Weohstan's son, stalwart to the end, had orders given to owners of dwellings, many people of importance in the land, to fetch wood from far and wide for the good man's pyre. Now shall flame consume our leader in battle, the blaze darken round him who stood his ground in the steel hail, when the arrow storm shot from bowstrings pelted the shield wall. The shaft hit home, feather-fledged, it finned the barb in flight. Then the wise son of Weohstan called from among the king's thanes a group of 7. He selected the best and entered with them, the 8th of their number, under the god-cursed roof. One raised a lighted torch and led the way. No lots were cast for who should loot the hoard, for it was obvious to them that every bit of it lay unprotected within the vault, there for the taking. It was no trouble to hurry to work and haul out the priceless store. They pitched the dragon over the cliff top. Let tides flow and backwash take the treasure minder. Then coiled gold was loaded on a cart in great abundance, and the grey-haired leader, the prince on his bier, was borne to Hronsness. The Geat people built a pyre for Beowulf, stacked and decked it until it stood 4 square, hung with helmets, heavy war shields, and shining armour, just as he had ordered. Then his warriors laid him in the middle of it, mourning a lord far famed and beloved. On a height they kindled the hugest of all funeral fires. Fumes of wood smoke billowed darkly up. The blaze roared and drowned out their weeping. Wind died down, and flames wrought havoc in the hot bone house, burning it to the core. They were disconsolate, and wailed aloud for their lord's decease. A Geat woman too sang out in grief. With hair bound up, she unburdened herself of her worst fears, a wild litany of nightmare and lament. Her nation invaded, enemies on the rampage, bodies in piles, slavery and abasement. Heaven swallowed the smoke. Then the Geat people began to construct a mound on a headland, high and imposing, a marker that sailors could see from far away, and in 10 days they had done the work. It was their hero's memorial. What remained from the fire they housed inside it, behind a wall as worthy of him as their workmanship could make it. And they buried torques in the barrow, and jewels, and a trove of such things as trespassing men had once dared to drag from the hoard. They let the ground keep that ancestral treasure, gold under gravel, gone to earth, as useless to men now as it ever was. Then 12 warriors rode around the tomb, chieftains' sons, champions in battle, all of them distraught, chanting in dirges, mourning his loss as a man and a king. They extolled his heroic nature and exploits, and gave thanks for his greatness, which was the proper thing, for a man should praise a prince whom he holds dear, and cherish his memory when that moment comes when he has to be convoyed from his bodily home. So the Geat people, his hearth companions, sorrowed for the lord who had been laid low. They said that of all the kings upon the earth, he was the man most gracious and fair-minded, kindest to his people, and keenest to win fame.